Imagine this for a moment. 1 second you are here, thinking, feeling, remembering, and the next, everything that defines you simply stops. No sound, no thoughts, no awareness, just silence. This is the edge of human understanding, the point where science meets mystery and where every human being, no matter how powerful or ordinary, eventually arrives. Death is not just an event. It is the greatest unanswered question of human existence, a phenomenon that science has tried to decode, measure, and understand, yet still cannot fully explain in terms of experience. What truly happens in the final moments? Does consciousness fade instantly, or does it unravel slowly like a thread being pulled apart? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, when the body dies, what happens to the mind that once called it home? From a biological perspective, death is not a single moment, but a process. Science defines death primarily through the cessation of vital functions. The heart stops beating, blood circulation ends, oxygen supply is cut off, and the brain begins to shut down. But this clinical definition only scratches the surface. The reality is far more complex. When the heart stops, it triggers a cascade of events inside the body. Within seconds, oxygen levels drop, and brain cells, highly sensitive to oxygen deprivation, begin to malfunction. Electrical activity in the brain starts to diminish, but it does not disappear instantly. Studies using electroencephalography, EEG, have shown that even after cardiac arrest, the brain can remain active for a short period, producing bursts of electrical signals that resemble heightened states of consciousness. This has led some scientists to question whether the brain, in its final moments, enters a unique state, a kind of last experience before complete shutdown. This raises a fascinating and deeply psychological question. Could what people describe as near-death experiences be connected to this final surge of brain activity? Many individuals who have come close to death report remarkably similar experiences, seeing bright lights, feeling a sense of peace, encountering familiar faces, or even perceiving themselves outside their own bodies. From a scientific standpoint, these experiences can be linked to specific neurological processes. As oxygen levels drop and carbon dioxide levels rise, the brain's chemistry changes dramatically. Neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine may surge, creating intense feelings of euphoria or calmness. The temporal lobe, responsible for processing memories and sensory input, can become hyperactive, potentially generating vivid, dreamlike visions. In this sense, what feels like a journey beyond life might actually be the brain's final attempt to make sense of its own collapse. But science does not dismiss these experiences as mere hallucinations. Instead, it tries to understand why the brain produces such structured, meaningful experiences under extreme stress. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, some researchers suggest that these sensations may serve as a coping mechanism, a way for the mind to reduce fear and anxiety during the most critical moment of existence. If the brain can transform terror into calmness, chaos into meaning, then perhaps death, at least in its final seconds, is not as painful as we imagine. This idea challenges one of humanity's deepest fears, that dying is inherently terrifying. Instead, science hints that the brain itself may protect us from that fear in its final act. Yet, the mystery deepens when we consider consciousness. Consciousness is not a physical organ that can be located or removed. It is an emergent property of brain activity, a complex interaction of neurons, electrical signals, and chemical processes. When the brain ceases to function, consciousness, as far as science can measure, disappears. But the exact moment this happens is still unclear. Does consciousness fade gradually as brain activity declines, or does it vanish suddenly when a critical threshold is crossed? Neuroscience has not yet provided a definitive answer. Some theories suggest that consciousness is like a network. When enough connections fail, the entire system collapses. Others propose that consciousness might persist briefly, even after measurable brain activity stops, existing in a state that current technology cannot detect. This uncertainty is what keeps the question of death so compelling. Science can measure heart rate, brain waves, and cellular activity, but it cannot directly measure subjective experience. It cannot tell us what it feels like to lose awareness, to transition from being alive to being nothing. This gap between objective measurement and subjective experience is where psychology plays a crucial role. The human mind does not just fear death because of physical pain. It fears the unknown, the loss of identity, the idea of non-existence. This fear is deeply rooted in our cognitive structure. Humans are uniquely aware of their own mortality, a concept known as mortality salience in psychology. This awareness shapes our behavior, our beliefs, and even our cultures. Theories like terror management theory suggest that much of human behavior is driven by an unconscious fear of death. According to this theory, people cope with the awareness of mortality by creating systems of meaning, religion, culture, achievements that give life a sense of purpose and continuity. In a way, these systems act as psychological defenses, protecting us from the overwhelming reality that life is finite. When we think about death, we are not just thinking about the end of biological processes. We are confronting the end of our personal narrative, the story we tell ourselves about who we are. This is why death feels so profound. It is not just the end of life, but the end of identity. Interestingly, research shows that when people are reminded of their mortality, their behavior changes in predictable ways. They may become more attached to their beliefs, more protective of their cultural values, and more motivated to achieve something meaningful. This suggests that the awareness of death is not just a source of fear, but also a powerful driver of human action. In this sense, death shapes life in ways that are both visible and invisible. It influences the choices we make, the relationships we form, and the legacy we hope to leave behind. From a physiological standpoint, the process of dying varies depending on the cause, but there are common patterns. As the body begins to shut down, systems fail in a sequence. Blood circulation weakens, organs receive less oxygen, and metabolic processes slow down. The brain, being the most energy-demanding organ, is one of the first to be affected. As neurons lose their ability to maintain electrical balance, communication between different parts of the brain breaks down. This can lead to confusion, disorientation, and eventually loss of consciousness. But even in this state, the brain may still be active in ways we do not fully understand. One of the most intriguing findings in recent years is the discovery of gamma-wave bursts in the brains of dying animals and, in some cases, humans. Gamma waves are associated with high-level cognitive functions, such as perception, attention, and memory. The presence of these waves near the moment of death suggests that the brain may enter a highly organized state, rather than simply shutting down chaotically. This challenges the traditional view of death as a gradual fading into darkness and instead raises the possibility that the final moments of life may be more structured and potentially more meaningful than we assume. Psychologically, this idea is both fascinating and unsettling. If the brain becomes highly active at the moment of death, what does that mean for subjective experience? Could a person relive memories, experience intense emotions, or perceive something entirely new? While science cannot yet answer these questions definitively, it continues to explore the boundaries of what is possible. What is clear, however, is that death is not just a biological event. It is a deeply psychological experience, shaped by both the physical processes of the brain and the mental frameworks we use to understand it. Another aspect that science examines is the concept of brain death, which is considered the legal definition of death in many countries. Brain death occurs when there is irreversible loss of all brain function, including the brainstem, which controls basic life functions like breathing. In this state, the body may still be kept alive artificially through machines, but there is no possibility of recovery. This distinction between biological life and conscious life raises important philosophical questions. If the body is still functioning, but the mind is gone, is the person truly alive? Science provides criteria for determining death, but it does not resolve the deeper question of what it means to be alive in the first place. As we explore these scientific perspectives, one thing becomes increasingly clear. Death is not a single, simple event. It is a complex transition involving multiple systems, each shutting down at its own pace. It is a process that can be measured in terms of biology but experienced in terms of consciousness, a dimension that science is still trying to fully understand. And within this gap lies the untold truth that despite all our technological advancements and scientific knowledge, the most personal aspect of death, the experience itself, remains beyond our complete understanding, existing at the intersection of science, psychology, and the unknown. As science continues to push deeper into the mechanics of death, another unsettling realization begins to emerge. The boundary between life and death is not as clear-cut as we once believed. For centuries, death was defined by a single, observable event: the final breath, the stopped heartbeat. But modern medicine has complicated this definition. With technologies like ventilators and life support systems, the body can be kept functioning long after the brain has lost its ability to sustain consciousness. This has forced scientists and philosophers alike to reconsider a fundamental question: is death the failure of the body or the disappearance of the mind? From a neurological standpoint, the brain is the command center of identity. Every thought, memory, emotion, and perception is encoded within complex networks of neurons. When these networks begin to break down, the sense of self, the I that experiences reality, also begins to dissolve. This dissolution is not always immediate. In many cases, especially in conditions like cardiac arrest or severe trauma, the brain undergoes a gradual shutdown. Regions responsible for higher-order thinking, such as the prefrontal cortex, are among the first to lose function, while more primitive areas, like the brainstem, may continue operating for a short time. This creates a strange and disorienting state where fragments of awareness may still exist, but the ability to process them coherently is compromised. This fragmented awareness plays a crucial role in understanding the psychological experience of dying. Imagine a mind that is losing its ability to interpret reality, where time becomes distorted and sensory input no longer makes sense. Some researchers believe that this state could explain why many near-death experiences feel timeless or surreal. Without the brain's normal ability to organize information, moments may stretch indefinitely, and memories may blend with perception. In this sense, the final moments of life may not follow the linear flow of time that we are accustomed to. Instead, they may exist in a kind of psychological collapse, where past, present, and imagined realities merge into a single, overwhelming experience. This idea is supported by studies on how the brain processes time under extreme conditions. When the brain is under stress, whether due to trauma, lack of oxygen, or intense emotional states, its perception of time can change dramatically. Seconds can feel like minutes, and brief experiences can feel incredibly detailed and prolonged. If this phenomenon occurs during the process of dying, it raises a profound possibility that the final moments of life, though brief in physical time, could feel subjectively much longer. This challenges the common assumption that death is a quick transition. Instead, it suggests that the mind may experience an extended sequence of events, even as the body is shutting down. Another layer of complexity emerges when we consider the role of memory. The human brain is not just a passive recorder of events, it actively constructs and reconstructs experiences. In the moments leading up to death, the brain may begin to access and replay memories in an attempt to make sense of the situation. Some researchers have proposed that this could result in a life review, a phenomenon often reported in near-death experiences where individuals claim to see moments from their past in rapid succession. While this idea is still debated, it aligns with what we know about how memory works under stress. The hippocampus, a region of the brain involved in memory retrieval, can become highly active during intense emotional states, potentially triggering vivid recollections. From a psychological perspective, this raises an important question. Why would the brain revisit past experiences at the moment of death? One theory suggests that this process may be linked to the brain's attempt to maintain a sense of identity. As the systems that support consciousness begin to fail, the brain may draw upon stored memories to preserve a coherent sense of self, even if only temporarily. In other words, the mind may be trying to hold on to its own existence, using memories as a final anchor before everything fades. But there is also a more unsettling interpretation. Some scientists argue that these experiences are not purposeful or meaningful in themselves, but rather the byproduct of a system in collapse. Just as a malfunctioning computer may display random images or data, the dying brain may produce fragmented and disorganized experiences that are later interpreted as meaningful. This perspective challenges the idea that there is any inherent purpose or design in the process of dying. Instead, it suggests that what we perceive as profound or spiritual experiences may simply be the result of chaotic neural activity. Yet even this interpretation does not fully resolve the mystery. The human brain is not a simple machine. It is a highly complex system shaped by evolution, capable of producing structured and meaningful experiences even under extreme conditions. The fact that near-death experiences often share common themes across different cultures and individuals suggests that there may be underlying mechanisms that guide these experiences in a consistent way. Whether these mechanisms are purely biological or involve something beyond our current understanding remains an open question. Another critical aspect of the science of death is the role of chemicals released in the brain during its final moments. Under conditions of extreme stress, the brain can release a variety of substances, including endorphins, which are natural painkillers, and other neurochemicals that can alter perception and mood. Some studies have suggested that compounds similar to those found in psychedelic substances may also be produced, potentially contributing to the vivid and often otherworldly experiences reported by individuals who have come close to death. These chemical changes could play a significant role in shaping the subjective experience of dying, influencing everything from emotional state to sensory perception. This brings us to a deeper psychological insight. The experience of death may be heavily influenced by the state of the mind before the event occurs. A person who is calm, accepting, or at peace may experience the process differently from someone who is fearful or resistant. This is not just speculation. Research in psychology and palliative care has shown that mental and emotional states can significantly impact how individuals perceive pain, stress, and even the process of dying itself. In this sense, death is not just a biological event, but a psychological journey that is shaped by the individual's beliefs, emotions, and experiences. At the same time, science also explores what happens after the brain has completely stopped functioning. Once all electrical activity ceases, the processes that generate consciousness are believed to end. From a strictly scientific perspective, there is no evidence to suggest that awareness continues beyond this point. However, this conclusion is based on the limits of current measurement techniques. Science can detect electrical activity and chemical processes, but it cannot directly measure subjective experience. This leaves a gap between what can be observed and what might be experienced, a gap that continues to fuel both scientific inquiry and philosophical debate. This gap is particularly important when we consider the concept of irreversibility. Death, in its final form, is defined by the point at which the processes that sustain life can no longer be restored. But determining this point is not always straightforward. Advances in medical science have shown that under certain conditions, the brain can survive longer without oxygen than previously thought, especially if the body is cooled or supported in specific ways. This has led to cases where individuals have been revived after extended periods of clinical death, raising questions about how close we can come to the boundary of death without crossing it completely. These cases challenge our understanding of what it means to be truly dead. If a person can be brought back after their heart has stopped and their brain activity has diminished, were they ever fully dead to begin with? Or does death only occur when recovery is no longer possible? These questions highlight the fluid nature of the concept of death, showing that it is not a fixed point, but a threshold that can shift depending on our technological capabilities and scientific knowledge. From a broader perspective, the science of death reveals a paradox. On one hand, it shows that death is a natural and inevitable part of life, governed by biological processes that can be studied and understood. On the other hand, it exposes the limits of our understanding, particularly when it comes to consciousness and subjective experience. This duality is what makes death such a compelling subject for both science and psychology. It is a phenomenon that can be analyzed in terms of cells and systems, but also one that touches on the deepest aspects of human existence: identity, meaning, and the fear of the unknown. As we continue to explore these ideas, it becomes clear that the untold truth of science about death is not a single answer, but a collection of insights that challenge our assumptions and expand our perspective. It forces us to confront the reality that while we can understand many aspects of how the body dies, the question of what it feels like and whether anything exists beyond that experience remains one of the most profound mysteries we have yet to solve. And so, when we strip away the myths, the fear, and the stories we tell ourselves, what remains is something both humbling and deeply unsettling. Death is not just an ending, but a process that reveals the fragile nature of everything we call self. Science shows us that the body follows a path, the brain undergoes a transformation, and consciousness, at least as we understand it, emerges, flickers, and eventually fades. Yet within that fading lies a final moment that no instrument can fully capture, no equation can completely explain. What we truly fear is not death itself, but the disappearance of experience, the silence after a lifetime of thoughts, emotions, and memories. And still, science quietly suggests that even in that final transition, the brain may create one last experience, one final perception shaped by everything we have ever been. Whether that moment is peaceful, chaotic, or something beyond imagination, it is uniquely human, formed by the same mind that spent a lifetime trying to understand its own existence. In the end, the untold truth is not that science has all the answers, but that it has brought us closer to the edge of understanding, where knowledge meets mystery. Death is no longer just a philosophical question or a distant fear. It is a reality woven into the biology of life and the psychology of being human. And perhaps the most profound realization is this: in trying to understand death, we are ultimately trying to understand life itself, because the way we see the end shapes everything we do before it arrives.